We are here to talk about client services and strategy and trying to move what are two absolutely fundamental departments. And when we talk about strategy, we also talk about specialists here, because I appreciate that that's very different in different agencies. But two incredibly important departments that need to work together. And we see it a lot, unfortunately, that these two departments can work in silos, and they really need to be working as one team to be able to support in every aspect of making sure that your projects are brilliant and you're delivering exactly what you are supposed to be delivering, but also you're growing your accounts and your client services team are able to have that and have enough of the knowledge to be able to do that. So why do we want to talk about this today? Because what we're seeing is things like, CS and strategy. That divide is really holding back client retention and growth. If your client services team is really not understanding that strategy, really not understanding what they're able and are being able to articulate it, it does become very difficult to then be able to ensure that the client has all the information that they need, but also to be able to identify those growth opportunities. And client services really need to be seen as that strategic partner. We've moved into this sort of area where client services have become very functional, very glorified project managers. And actually, it's imperative that we move them into that much more of that strategic partner. Clients are screaming out for that, and we need to be able to be moving them to do that. But we need to be able to enable them to be able to do that as well. And what does a healthy client service and strategy collaboration look like from a client's perspective as well? And then what are those practical steps to shift from that CS versus, that sort of where they're not aligned and they may be clashing heads, to actually CS with strategy and, as a one collaborative team and having that very client-centric culture in your agency. So that's what we're going to be thinking about today. So who are we to talk about this? So I'm Jo Rogers. I am the founder of Client Success Matters. I'm a strategic client services person. I have worked in agencies for 20 odd years. I've actually worked client side as well as a strategist and working with agencies. So I've seen it from both sides. Actually, at the moment, I'm actually working for an agency at the moment as a strategist. So I'm really seeing, on the ground what it's like to work with client services as well. And then my lovely co-host here as well, I've got with me.
You're talking about me, right? Yeah. So I'm Simon. I am the founder of a marketing consultancy, Archman, and my background, much like Jo, a lot of time in agencies. I set up my company 6.5 years ago on Saturday, actually. So there's been a lot of real great movements of experiences that I've had, and I did a lot of time when I was working in agencies as a client service lead, but I also ended up doing a lot of strategy from my performance background and then doing omnichannel strategy. So much like Jo, I have those different experiences. And I think what we're trying to do is sort of bring it together and aggregate it. And like Jo, I'm passionate about just having, strategy doing great work, but it getting surfaced but it's only going to be surfaced well if there's a happy client relationship. And with happy client relationship, you need good client service. So that's something that I think we're both really passionate about, and which was kind of the genesis of us doing this, wasn't it, Jo? So yeah, I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the challenges. So what we've got here, we have a number of things that we've kind of anecdotally crowdsourced over the thing in these post-it notes. And it's things that we've experienced over time. And it's things that I'm sure many of you will relate to. If there's anything else you can think of, put it in the chat. But I think what we've got to here is a sort of a general, I mean, we did a big brainstorming session here, and we're not with literal post-it notes, but we kind of shot things around, and we got to a point where there seems to be a thread of things that do generally pop up as challenges internally. So for the purpose of this presentation, anything turquoise is strategy and anything pink is client services. Obviously nothing to do with the fact with our respective business brands, but to keep it simple, we've got a system here for you to check out. So from a strategic point of view, strategies get pulled into many client conversations, which they naturally would, especially if they're certain specialists, but they don't. It's good for them to do it, but they don't always want that, and there needs to be done it in a certain way where it's managed. Strategists, big challenge is on the right, I'd say, which is we don't want to lose impact of execution. You know, if there's too many things and there's not a proper process and there isn't proper R&Rs and divide and conquers, the worst nightmare for a strategist is to deliver a strategy that's informed and it doesn't come to life. Okay. So, you know, the downside of the top bullet, the top post-it note is that we don't want to become dependent to answer every question. And yeah, obviously we've got strategy loses impact in execution twice there. But I think the main, what that was actually meant to be, strategists want to be, you know, seen as adding value to client services. That's what I should say. So yeah, but over to you, Joe, on yours. I think you've got a similar sort of energy from the other side, haven't you? So
Yeah, sure. So, you know, when client services are not given the tools and the knowledge and enabled to be able to have strategic conversations with their clients, or you know, they're not trusted in the agency to have those high level strategic conversations. Also, what ends up happening is that your clients typically then go over the head of client services and default to your strategist or your specialist, which is really dangerous, because that's where, you know, miscommunication can happen, you know, loss of information between clients, and it's going to the strategist and maybe doesn't go back to client services, or wrong expectations are set, etc. And actually what ends up happening is that, you know, client services sort of get pushed down a little bit and just become positioned as doers, not thinkers. You're just there to manage the project without actually realizing the importance of what client services actually offer, to not only from a perspective of really understanding their clients, being the voice of the client internally, but also being able to think for themselves. You know, you've got lots of experience themselves in working in projects. You know, they have ideas and suggestions as well. But if a client services person also doesn't really understand products, services, the strategy, what they're actually doing, then it's nearly impossible for them to be able to identify growth opportunities, because they don't really understand where that, you know, what to look for, the challenges that they should be looking for, the services that could be offered for the, you know, as a solution to the potential challenges for the client. So, you know, if we have them as two siloed departments and not working together, there's so many issues that can come out in your agency. And actually, one of the things we really wanted to dig into here was, you know, what we're actually seeing on the ground, because both me and Simon work with a lot of agencies. We've worked in a lot of agencies as well. And one of the things I'm really noticing here is that this typically happens when an agency has been built with a strategist department or a specialist department before a client services department. So what ends up happening is, obviously they start out, the client's going directly to the strategist or the specialist, which is understandable. And then they get to a point where you're like, well, it's not the role and responsibility of that strat or the specialist to grow and retain. Their job is to, you know, create the strategy and support on the delivery. It's not actually to retain and grow the client. And you get to a point where you're like, actually, we need to focus and double down on this. So you bring in a client services team, but you've got historical ways of working. And unless you put in the right frameworks and processes in place, bringing in client services into that scenario and elevating them to take over that relationship, which had been held with the strats and specialists, can be difficult. And what ends up happening is that people, one, don't like change, and they struggle with finding their place. And that's the bit which we really need to be thinking about. What do we put around that to ensure that the two teams respect each other, respect the place that they have and why they're in the agency in the first place.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think what you said before, Joe, around, you know, you said you've been doing some strategy work in client services. It's exactly the same with me. I'm actually working on a campaign at the moment integrated across different channels. And I'm kind of running point as a client service strategist. So I'm doing strategy for this particular campaign, but I'm also essentially corralling and project managing and client servicing. So I think what this kind of has given us is this kind of empathy of each other's lives as well, a little bit as well further, which I think is very true. And to Joe's point, I mean, a lot of the things we talk about there, letting go of things. If you look at a lot of agencies, and if some of you on the phone might be from digital agencies, performance agencies, PR agencies, And I think the main thing about it is you'll be used to being, you might be a head of, I don't know, SEO, or you might be a, I don't know, a PR account manager. I don't know. But I think what happens is people become very, very good and strategic at their area. But I think if an actual client function comes in, it can be hard for strategists to let go. But at the other end of things, I think sometimes you've got a client account manager, they can sometimes want to go, they want to hold on to the strategy. But if you bring a strategist in, you've got to let them have their have their piece. And I think one of the things we've both seen and we've talked about is the reliance on the strategist as well. That's actually zero sum, because the client services, they're not getting the correct optics with the client if the strategist is answering and doing all the stuff. But at the same time, the strategists aren't benefiting either, because they're probably thinking, oh God, I don't want to be doing this stuff. I don't know what the timelines are. So this is why I think it's such an important thing to have such an understanding of each other's worlds, whether it's, you're doing the processes there, you're doing the insights there. And depending what your shape is, I can guarantee you've all felt a bit of that sometimes, of like, hang on a minute, I shouldn't be doing this. And I think that's where I think I've definitely witnessed that as a result of some of these challenges.
Yeah, definitely. And as I sort of mentioned, I am doing a bit of strategy work in the agency at the moment. And it has been really interesting for me because, on the one side, I'm having one-to-one calls with the client without an account director or any client lead there. And the client's asking me about timelines and, how to develop this further. And I don't know the budget boundaries. And he's asking what's going on with other areas of the project. And I don't know what to say. I mean, I obviously do know how to deal with that situation, but I don't have that information to give him, so I can't set any clear expectations. So having someone talking directly, a strategist talking directly to a client without someone that has all those answers, is just frustrating for the clients. But then on the flip side, what I have also noticed being the strategist is that I've seen client services being really reactive. So they'll see something come up in the project management tool and just do it without taking the time to understand the why behind the work. Why are we doing this? What's the purpose for this? How is this going to fit into the bigger picture? So it's been really eye-opening for me as well, sitting on the other side, working with client services, of why it's so important that they work together. Because if you work in silos, it just causes problems internally and it causes problems to the client as well.
Agree. I mean, I could add to that, but I think I was actually thinking this actually does work, doesn't it? And obviously you're going to talk about the handover gaps on this. I remember that. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So why does this happen? As we said, these strategy handover gaps, see it time and time again. If I ask a client lead, tell me about the strategy, they wouldn't have a clue. Most people don't really understand the strategy. And what's ending up happening is that, you might find that client services are taking the brief, they hand over the brief to the strategist, they develop the strategy, it goes back to the client services person, it gets delivered to the client, and we go into delivery. But the client services person doesn't really understand what the strategy is. It's been developed, siloed, and has just been given to them, and it's been presented to the client, but there's actually no understanding behind it, like the why behind it. How does it fit in? How does it link to the bigger business objectives? What's the point of it? So that causes a huge problem. And then that lack of marketing and service offering knowledge. Like if your client services team don't understand, and when I say marketing, I don't mean thinking about just what you offer. Marketing as a whole, how does what you offer fit into the whole marketing mix? They should be marketing generalists to understand that, but they really should understand your service offerings, not just from the perspective of being able to deliver on what they need to be delivering on, but how can they try and understand and identify growth opportunities if they don't understand your service offerings and how that they can support on any of the challenges your clients might face? And then one big, massive one is time pressures. Client services are, being pushed more and more into just get it done. Like, time budgets are getting tighter. Everyone's getting pushed and squeezed more. You gotta give them time to have a little bit of blue sky thinking. You gotta give them time to be able to, review things, and we'll get into the details, but review things for strategy, go through things, understand them, take the time to make sure that they really understand what they're delivering on, rather than just being a functional team, in and out team. and limited confidence and opportunity to challenge. Confidence comes with knowledge. If they don't have the knowledge, like just as I've talked about, they're not going to have confidence, and therefore they're not going to be able to be confident to challenge their clients and to be able to push thinking. And ultimately, they're just not close enough to that strategy. The closer they are to the strategy and understanding why they're doing it, the better they are going to be able to articulate everything that they need to, and make sure that they are able to spot those opportunities, retain those clients, and be that strategic partner that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and they're not close enough to the strategy thing. On the converse side of a strategy, you look at lower visibility of client context. I mean, that's something where the natural nature of agencies, as we've said, either they've evolved with specialists who do strategy or omni-channel strategy with separate client services. We've kind of created our own challenges in a way. But that's a whole other webinar about agency setups. But in the world we're in, we need to accept that we're going to have these challenges. So lower visibility of client context is a challenge. Sometimes we'll get given a brief, or we get given something, or the MD wins the account, or the new biz person brings it in, and it's like, right, what's the context behind it? So we have to do stuff like that, and then what's happening day to day with the account. And I think with that is poor collaboration at times. That's a big reason why we are where we are. The collaboration, not just on bigger stuff like working together on a strategy, but actually the day-to-day stuff. Are we delivering what we should be? Are we right in the are we cashing the checks? I think fear of dilution is a big worry for strategy. It does happen. Unclear ownership, as we've discussed as well. I think unclear ownership is probably the biggest thing, which we will go through in the remainder of today's presentation. But I think that is something where, through natural growth and sort of adding that person, they take that off your plate. There is always those blurry grey lines, isn't there? And I think that's a challenge. And then going to the main point of, just don't always trust CS to articulate the strategy. Like Jo said, when she's working on strategy and she goes on the Monday board, and there's a job that CS are picking up, faster than the speed of light to do their job quickly, which is great because we love getting stuff off the to-do list. But actually, it's a time of like, hang on a minute, what's the why? It's taking the time. And I think the big North Star of this, of course, is that the R&Rs are blurred, and that's ultimately why we need to rectify these challenges with clearer, roles and responsibilities, I think. So, the overall, I'd say, goals we want to get to from a strategy perspective is to ensure that the informed strategy is carried forward by client services and related stakeholders and brought to life in campaign. Because ultimately, as Joel touched on as well at the bottom, we want great work delivered to a happy client. The strategists want the great work. The client services want the happy client. We dream the same dream. We want the same thing. Insert another 80s lyric. It might be a bit before some of your time. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, this is where we're getting to, right, Jo? So yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously from client services, it's about owning that client relationship at a strategic level and bridging that strategy and delivery to confidently carry that thinking forward. So that's ultimately where we want to get ourselves to. And as Simon said, this is all about making sure that we're creating brilliant work, which I know that you all do, and making sure that they're happy client, but we're doing it in an efficient way. I think efficiency underlies a lot of this as well. The more it feels like sometimes that we'll be putting things in places that will take away agility or efficiency, but actually what we're doing is making we're just building in way more efficiency between them, and actually everyone being a lot happier in their roles and working together as well. And ultimately what we're trying to do is bring them into that one team, everyone having that client-centric viewpoint, and everyone working together rather than feeling like they're two departments. And I have seen it time and time again in the agencies that I've worked in and agencies that I've supported. I've seen this sort of real like them against us kind of mentality, and that just doesn't work. We need to bring everyone together to work as one team. So what does the ideal look like? From a client services perspective, we want to be able to be leading those strategic conversations with our clients with confidence, understanding the why behind the work and those strategic decisions that they've taken. It's really important when I talk about having a strategic client services department. They are not strategists. They are strategic, which means that they don't need to know how everything is done and the intricacies behind it. They're not expected to build everything. What they need to understand is why the strategy has been put in. What does that mean, and how does it fit with the bigger picture, and how does it link to the client's bigger business goals. And it's supposed to be about bridging those client goals with strategic intent and bringing value from the client's insight into strategy. So, client services, but the more that they talk to clients, the more they understand what they're trying to do. You are the voice of the client, you are the voice of the account and the industry. What you're doing is bringing that over into strategy, because they won't have all of that context. It's super important and incredibly invaluable for that information to be put into strategy, so that when they are building their strategy, they know that whatever they create is going to, one, fit within budget, two, fit within timelines, three, fit within expectations of the client, is going to link to the strategic overall business objectives. Like, that is really fundamental. Otherwise, strategists can just, enjoy, endless amounts of budgets and, et cetera, et cetera. It's really important that client services have that voice there and know when and when not to involve strategists or specialists. As Simon said earlier, it's important to have them in the room, but when? Not for every single conversation with a client. That's completely inefficient. You're going to be spending a huge amount of money as well if you're going to be doing that, if you're looking at it from a revenue point of view. You really need to be thinking about when is the right time to involve strategists into those conversations. Because ultimately, what you also want to be doing is building those trusted senior level relationships. That's how you're also ultimately going to grow this account. You can't do that if you, as a client services person, sit back and allow your strategists and senior members of your team to be able to have those conversations as well. It's all about spotting those opportunities for growth ultimately. And really, what we're trying to do here is work in true partnership with strategy. That's the ultimate goal as well.
Who deliver an informed strategy. And first of all, we've got our jobs, right? Clients, let's be clear, client services are help to deliver client success, value, growth, and happy clients. Strategists are brought in to deliver informed strategies and plan of actions for client growth. Okay, so we want to be able to deliver that, but we can do that in unison, as Joe says. Now, I say here, have CS support before the work, then understand once done for continuity. So we'll cover this in the coming steps, but the key thing is to actually have CS know along the way. Of course, we divide and conquer, but the more informed and empowered CS are, the more, as a strategist, it's going to do you a favor, and they will help you cash those said checks, right? Strategy, we want it to be informed by client objectives. When we do our research on competitor, customer, culture, company, we need to ensure that, you could even put CS as another C, to be honest. It's about having those client understandings and realities and budgets in place. We want to ensure that the insights inform the research, and again, that comes from the client. And as I said, R&Rs are very important around delivery. And by delivery, that could be when to deliver the strategy. When could that be to deliver the plan? When do we want CS to say, hang on a minute, we don't know that. You know that. You know the deadlines. You know when you're going live on a campaign, for example. And, we want to be the trusted client partner alongside CS, but we are not the client partner. And ultimately, we use our insights to identify opportunities for growth. Hopefully CS can help spot it, and we end up in this world where we are working in true partnership. So I want to just spend a couple of minutes on this. Who would be a strategist if they didn't do some boxes with an arrow behind it? Okay, so what I got to here is what's the way to put this? We've worked on so many different types of agencies between us in God knows how many years between us. Let's not go down that road. But what we've sort of spotted across the different tenets, it could be digital agency, it could be a media agency, it could be a creative agency, it could be a network agency in London, it could be a performance agency in the north of England. It doesn't matter. We have aggregated what we've seen works best and what doesn't work. And we've kind of come up with some what we believe are kind of fundamental truisms about what can actually essentially work across it. So obviously working on this notation of, purple being client services and turquoise being strategy, as a reminder, this is where we got to. Now, we're going to go through these one by one, but what we're trying to get at here is that the grey area for new business, by the way, that's a conversation we'll come to, but generally there's a dance on a lot of the stages between client services and strategy. And of course, the BDIs amongst you will know that there can be some changes. There'll also be a lot more steps on the delivery side, but ultimately where client service and strategy bisect, this is where we need to be thinking about how CS run the initial part on the kickoff, strategy do their part, and then obviously implementation reviews a lot more CS heavy. Now, the key thing in the middle here is around the 4, 5, and 6, which I've highlighted. That is something that often isn't talked about and is often, I'd say, skimmed over, to be honest. And it's the internal alignment. The strategy is delivered, the playback happens, but internally there's that step, and it might seem a little bit superfluous, but it is so important to get full alignment for everyone so the client services feel totally empowered by the strategic work.
Fab. Okay, so we're going to start off on this first one. The grey essentially is, imagine a new business person, whether you've got a sales director, whoever that is. But in the new business process, it is absolutely fundamental that client services are involved in the new business process. Now, I would say that they should come in around about the discovery stage. They don't need to be through the full process, but at the point where you are into discovery with your client, you're talking about what that brief might look like, really starting to get an understanding of who the client is. Clients buy into the person that they are going to be working with on a day-to-day basis. People buy people, as we well know. So whether it's a pitch situation or it's just a new business conversation, it's absolutely critical to have client services involved in that discovery stage. And strategy, wherever there is a need for things like research, whether that's into the pitch stage as well, really important to include strategy. They don't need to be included in that new business process, as we were just talking about with client services. But when it comes to developing out what your response to that brief might be, or going into that pitch process, it's really important to involve strategy at that stage.
Yeah, definitely.
Over to you.
Okay, so I thought basically this is generally a client service piece. The client services do generally take the lead on capturing the client brief, and as the strategy, you can build on this, Joe. But the strategy side, I think we're there to support on the briefing and the setup and the questions. So
yeah, I think the point about here is that the client brief is the absolutely fundamental part of really making sure that we've captured all of the right information that the strategist needs. So it's really important that your strategy team define what a client brief looks like.
Yeah.
So don't leave it to luck. Make sure that there is a solid client brief in place and that the client services team have been trained on how to ask the right questions and what are the critical questions that need to happen and what are those nice to haves as well.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think my point is on that initially, the optics wise, the client brief is very much led by client services. Absolutely. But the strategic input is critical here. If we're doing a briefing process, and I know some of you on the phone will know this about, having like great questions, really understanding everything. And, I'm sure the CS, as this develops, and if you do embed these kind of relationships, these things will develop and you'll be able to have these questions off the bat. But there's often, bar the standard stuff, there might be a specific industry, category, product nuance that the strategists have uncovered in their insight or their knowledge since new business. And I think it's really important to tap into that at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, as Simon mentioned earlier, every process will be slightly different. But if you do internal kickoffs, which is an important piece, but wherever they come in your process, in your internal kickoff, it's really important, again, that client services are running that internal kickoff. And as Simon mentioned, optics is really important internally as much as it is to the client as well. Client services need to be seen as the ones that are running and taking the ownership of the account and the program that they're running. So they need to be running that internal kickoff, aligning all relevant departments, including finance, on the work that is pending, what is coming up. And strategy is there to support client services in the kickoff. They can give more meat to the bones if necessary. So they are there in collaboration with client services, but it's very much a client services run internal kickoff.
Yeah, agree. And obviously strategy, is strategy. Strategists should do strategy, and that is the potentially the way. I mean, I've always you could argue that the strategist, it depends on the agency as well. Sometimes it might just be the pure strategist doing it. If it's a smaller agency, client account manager, it might be all purple. I don't know, but as a general aggregated truth, the strategist needs to research, plan, deliver the strategy, but that is done with the support of the CS. As we said before, in what great looks like and the goals, we need to embed ourselves in the realities of the client. For research purposes, what's the actual commercial goals? What's the landscape of the client? What's the happening? Are they getting bought? Are they currently rebranded? Have they put their budget down year on year? Was the business won? Is the founder a mate with them? We don't know. We need to know this stuff, right? And I think Joe, you would definitely support on that one, wouldn't you?
Yeah, 100%. No strategy should be silo. There should always be client services giving guidance on expectations as well.
And the best strategies are always the ones where you've corralled different sources from different areas. Again, this isn't a webinar for building strategy, but everyone knows about AI, and you can get these AI personas and things like that. But it's important to get the ethnographic understanding, the real world, the conversations, and that happens. And what better way than to engage internal stakeholders who are so close to this?
Absolutely.
And then obviously this is the part that we were very excited about on the flowchart, the internal strategy alignment. For me, this is the build that I don't think I've seen enough of, and I don't think Joe has either. And I think if we can have that bit between building a strategy and then between us playing it back to the client, this is so important. We go through it internally. The CS are totally pre-briefed and they have the full understanding. And then obviously by the time client services leave the room, they fully investigated it. They understand the strategy and importantly, the tenet. It's not like the quick, all right, we want to target, jugglers in the Hebrides and they go off and do it. We're saying we want CS to go, right, why do you want to target those jugglers? Why in the Hebrides, right? So I think it's about understanding the where and the why and the sort of what's built, what's laddered up to the strategy. And I think at that point, CS is so much more garnered with the backup cards for the next step.
Absolutely. To me, this is the critical step, which is missed a lot. And again, it might be that throughout your own internal process that you need to be putting steps like this in play. So even when you get into delivery, it might be that actually you need to have little steps in that you're realigning with client services and strategy again, why this step? Because the more the client services understand, more they can articulate and have those levels of conversations with the clients. The more they learn, the easier those conversations become, the more they step up into that strategic role. If they are kept out of it, I've spoken to agencies before where, I'm sitting there speaking to the client services person, and they're like, oh, I don't know what's coming next. So if they have no idea of what's coming next, how on earth can they articulate to the client? And the other thing as well about this that I've seen happen quite a lot is, particularly if you don't have this step, is that a lot of agencies, their strategists actually do things differently. So even if they're running the same typical process that they would have done with a different client, they do it differently with every different strategist they work with. So it's even harder then for client services then to articulate or have any understanding of what might come next. So if you realign before it's even gone back to the client, and client services are really comfortable and have bought in emotionally into that program, it will change everything. And then ultimately what then ends up happening is that you then go into the playback. And this is that really critical piece of where client services lead that meeting. So you've got strategy there supporting with the depth and the rationale of the playback. But if client services have had that conversation, they understand the why, they are going to feel more confident in that strategic playback to the client, which is then ultimately going to get the client to feel confident in client services, that they understand that and that they're going to be able to deliver and lead on it. And they're not going to feel the necessity to go over client services and speak to the strategist.
Yeah, and this is deliberately out of all of them. You'll see this is a 50-50 play because it can't all be CS because that would obviously negate the work of the strategist, but it can't all be strategy because that would totally obfuscate the work of the client services and the continuity. So going back to the point of this is a real unified moment. And now we'll talk about this, the one unit, the one team, one silo. What better way to have that to have us both in the room having the conversation?
Yeah. And then we go into implementation, planning, and activation. So obviously, client service is going to lead those internal meetings with the delivery team, again, to explain to everyone the why behind the what, translating that into activation. And then strategy is there to replay the work if necessary. So again, it's a supporting role, it's an enablement role. It's if client services feel the need to be able to get strategy involved in that, then it's absolutely fine. And again, we have to look at this on a project by project basis. If strategy are just not needed and the client services person can articulate that, then absolutely. If it's a little bit more complicated, then strategy is there to bring in as and when is necessary.
I would say on this one, it is a little bit of a caveat you watch out, exactly as you say, Joe, because I think sometimes on this, you want the strategist, they might be the ones who do the plan as well, and implementational planning, line by line planning. And there's that making sure that this is one of those things where the link in the chain can drop for strategists. So I think it's super important that everyone understands, right, the so what. Like if I'm doing a strategy of targeting, these jugglers in Scotland, is the PPC team bidding on the terms for these jugglers in Scotland? It's having these, it's every little thing. And I think I just want to make sure that the checkbook's there, so definitely.
Absolutely. And then ultimately, I mentioned it earlier, this 30-day alignment and review, strategy and client services coming together and looking at what's working, what's not working, what's feedback is coming back from the client, and realigning on that strategy. Does anything need to change? And it's a collaboration. They must, you need to be coming together. It's obviously led by client services to implement that. But you come together and you work together on what it looks like. And whether anything needs to change. Really important. And I say 30-day alignment, that should be then a continuation.
Yeah.
So 30 days and then the next 30 days, et cetera, et cetera. So that there's never a feeling like, every people are coming in and one and done. Strategy isn't just there and then gone. They're absolutely there to come in and then give their
going back to the magic word optics we use, Joe, I think, for strategists, we're not going to chop and change it because a strategy by its very essence is something that you maintain as a fundamental and then you optimize in flight, right? For whatever you do. But I think optics wise, it's important that, I always say with clients, I'll always do some work with them, but I'll always make sure that I do an aftercare package, a check-in and a report, because it's really, really important to sort of make sure that, I'm here. I want to ensure that my work is coming through. I'm not hiding behind those slides I did 3 months ago, right? So I think that's a super important time as well for the strategist.
Yeah.
But I will say it does depend. Okay. So you might have noticed throughout this, and this is always the thing. As a marketing consultant, surely this is one of my top 10 most used phrases, but it does get maligned sometimes from the consultancies, but it's so true in this context because some of you might have a founder who does all the new biz. Some of you might have a dedicated head of strategy. Some of you might do strategy and as a client account manager. Some of you might be a CS team without any strategy at all, just someone who does, I don't know, designs or buys ads. So the main thing about this is we do know the shapes differ, but we hope from that sort of flow there are fundamentals. It might not be the team doing it. It might be the turquoise might represent a task that needs doing. So I think it's about understanding how that fits as well. So I just wanted to sort of say that.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can you do this? So I talked a little bit about this, about process. Process is really important in what we're talking about here. You really want to be having things like SOP, so standing operating processes for strategy, to really be really clear for everyone about how to work with them. How defining those inputs, the outputs, the checkpoints, those sign-off moments. When are strategy going to be working in that program, and how do they work in that program, and how do you work with them? And equally, client services need to have their own standards. What does good look like? That's across communication, meetings, their client management, but also internally as well. So how do client services and strategy work together? That also comes down to those roles and responsibilities. Where's the ownership at every stage of that client life cycle? When does each person come in? You can use the references of what we've done with the pink and the blue, where you can see, who's more responsible, who comes in at what point. Because if you don't have that, it's just blurred, and it's never going to help anyone. And also that client briefing template that we talked about at the beginning, processes and things like that, it just ensures that you have that level of confidence. Because what we want to be doing here, as much as the alignment, we're trying to build trust between the two departments as well. Trust and respect, absolutely fundamental between the two departments. And trust comes when, like, from a strategy point of view, that they feel like they know that they're going to get the information that they need. So give client services the documentation that they need to be able to ensure that they get all that information from them. So we're trying to be efficient whilst giving everyone the material that they need to be able to ensure that everyone gets what they need. And then training opportunities. I think there's not enough people and agencies that think about this. Your agency has so much knowledge in it, so much knowledge. You need to be sharing this stuff. And if you don't share, if you run out of sharing in between cross departments of things like lunches and learning, other things that are your from a client services perspective that they need to know, like training on agency services. You cannot expect your client services team to grow your agency if they do not understand your agency, the history of the agency, what the services are that you're offering, and how it fits into the bigger marketing mix. Commercial acumen, again, being able to understand what it means if you have a strategist in every single meeting or multiple people in every single meeting. What does that mean from a commercial perspective in terms of the profitability of your campaigns? And then pushing them to ask those strategic questions. So, get your strategist to set up a workshop, a strategic questioning workshop. What are those questions that they can ask, not only internally when they're going through that alignment piece on the strategy, but also what strategic questions can they ask the client, maybe in that client briefing process? Give them the tools to be able to be confident and be able to have that level of communication with the clients that they need. And then again, I talked about this earlier, general marketing strategy is really, really important, that client services actually have a general marketing understanding. It's not just about your services. You really need to know how it fits with the whole marketing mix.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, to your point, you can learn off each other. And I think these things, like we said about the lunch and learns, I mean, these are the sort of things where it's building a culture of mutual understanding and respect of each other's roles as well. I think that's super important. And that might come from, that's more leadership maybe, or the leads in the business. But I think if you can take it upon yourselves today to come off the call and think, right, what can I do to bridge any gaps? I think that's a really good start. And I think, client understanding, you talk about the strategy side of things. There's sometimes, I think you've got to remember, we're always selling, right? Client services are selling good service and selling themselves. Strategy, you have to sell in a strategy. So being able to communicate that and understand that and share that kind of, really have conviction in what you're sharing and why with evidence is super important. I think that's something that's often overlooked in the world of, Zoom calls and spreadsheets. I think, let's not escape the craft of creating a story and bringing clients to life on your journey of marketing transformation. Okay. And operational awareness as well, for the strategists. This can be a little more less interesting and prosaic, but I think it's super important, as we said, to know if I have to update that board on Monday or Trello or whatever the hell I'm using, I will do that, but tell me what I need to do as the bare minimum. And then other strategy trainings, for example, there's strategy only stuff like research, or we might have to use a certain tool for planning or keywords and stuff. But I think underneath this, we've also put all benefit training external. So we've talked about negotiation. insights, tools. A truly client-centric strategic organization, CS, whatever badge you wear, a pink badge, a blue badge, the negotiation and insights are key. You're going to be wanting to use those. So I think that's something that I think is there's kind of definitely 3 areas of strategy only, CS only, and all agency really. So yeah.
Absolutely. And so look, this doesn't happen by chance. You really do have to be considered with everything to ensure that your team work in sync with each other. So to do this, you need to have that shared delivery rhythm. If you have a strategist or a specialist all working differently, as I mentioned before, it makes it very difficult to see us to know and articulate to the client what's happening next. So the more aligned you are, the more efficient you'll both be, and the more clarity the client will have. And process can feel like you're removing agility, but in fact, it just ensures that everyone is much more efficient and clear on the ways of working internally. And as I said before, you've got so much knowledge in your agency as it is, and you should be sharing this through those lunches and learns that we talked about, strategy workshops, upskill everyone in the agency on what each person does. Because the more client services know, the more confident they'll be to articulate that strategy, push back on clients, spot those growth opportunities. And ultimately, it all comes down to trust and respecting each other's really vital roles. And this all needs to be delivered and driven by leadership, heads of departments, ensuring that their teams are working together and it doesn't turn into that one department against each other, that everyone is coming together with that client-centric mindset and working together as one collaborative team.
Definitely.
So this is now your opportunity to ask any questions that are going on in your agency
So far, yeah.
Yeah.
You can shout and come off mute, or you can write it in the chat, whatever's comfortable for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or neither.
Anyone got any thoughts that we've covered off? Anyone got anything specific going on in their agency that they want to ask? Callum, you look like you come off mute. Go on, you can
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
go.
I suppose for our agency at the moment, we're sort of in a transition point where we haven't got a strategy team, as you know, Simon, or you knew we didn't have. We still haven't got to that point from a client revenue where we can sort of justify having non-billable roles. So we've got our strategists that are sort of heads of departments, more senior members of service teams, and client services are acting as sort of like account managers rather than even CS sort of like people at the moment. And I think we're really struggling to be able to get the bandwidth to enable CS to do the more CSy type things and then work better with the heads of departments. There's some things that you've shared here which are really useful. I think just some of the processes in how we sort of do new business, and I really liked the sort of check-ins after. We don't do any check-ins as a team. Obviously we do, but we don't sort of revisit our initial proposal and how well we're delivering against that. So yeah, I think there's lots that we can take from this.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Callum.
Thanks, Callum. And sorry, just to add to that, Callum, I think, like I say, I know that you've got a different setup and every agency is different. But I think, like I say, it doesn't have to be, someone's blue and someone's the pink. It could be a case of if the CS person has to do that, they do that. If I know you've got like a head of SEO and a head of performance, things like that, it's encouraging them to think in that way as well, I think. So I think I'm super interested to see how you get on with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, Callum, going back onto having account managers in place at the moment, maybe your account managers are not skilled enough yet to be able to take on the role that you need them to. But I think that what you can do is start putting plans in place to be able to start to upskill them to get to that point. So it's because I think it's quite commonplace what ends up happening, and I've seen it in lots of agencies, as I said, they start with the strategists or the specialists and they bring in the account managers to start doing account management, but actually they're sort of missing that layer there because it's sort of feeling is that, well, they're only taking a bit of sort of the doing away. They're not taking away any of the thinking or the management away from it. So it's where it's that bridging that gap of you kind of gone a little bit low you probably needed to go a little bit higher in terms of that first role in take that off. So now it's like, well, you've got them in place, which is absolutely fine. But now how can you upskill them to start to take on those things? And that's a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. That will all come down to knowledge, giving them the understanding, giving them the ability to be able to learn and articulate the why starts to shift the narrative between, being seen as just a doer to being more of a leader and a partner to the clients.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's one of the things that I've sort of bolded out in my notes is that CS need to be marketing generalists as opposed to just account managers, because we I think we've fallen in the trap of being more like project managers in a lot of cases. And, once you get into that cycle of, you're very busy and you're just trying to make sure that all the service areas are doing what they should be, as opposed to, like you say, taking a step back, having some time to think about the strategy and moving it forward as well as the strategists in the teams doing that, because it does have to be both sides of the coin.
Yeah. Very, very commonplace as well, Callum. So you're not on your own there. I think that's a very common situation because you typically try and fill a gap, fill a need, rather than think about what's the right setup for your agency.
Yeah.
Anyone got anything else they want to share or ask any questions? Okay.
The room has spoken, I think.
You're all good. You can reach out to me and Simon after this if you've got anything. But
I think, and we might sort of finish on the final thoughts. And everything you just said is spot on as well, Callum. And I remember when I was in a bigger agency about 10 years ago, and someone put this up on the screen, and I was like, what the hell is this corny nonsense, right? But they put a picture of a swan up, and it stuck with me because the idea of the swan, and it's about the fact it just glides along on the lake looking so graceful, right? And underneath it's paddling like mad. And I think there's always that element of, look, you're in an agency and the role of an agency is to deliver for a client, right? In the client's eyes, you are that unified site, that one team, that one organism, that swan, right? So have all that paddling underneath, sort your stuff out internally, add that internal alignment stage. Let's get all those stages in the paddling, because I think ultimately, and Joel building this, the client work and client success, like we said, we want happy clients doing good work. That's only going to happen. And this swan's going to be so gracious if we actually do that. So I just think about that and how it comes across on the optics there, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, from a client services perspective, like our job isn't, and this might, again, it's conditional. Some agencies it might be, but our job isn't to define the strategy. What it is to bring it to life. So, when we, as a client services person, when we understand that thinking behind the work, it means that we can communicate it with that confidence, making those better decisions for our clients, create that trust, and allows strategy to focus where they add the most value. And, to be much more efficient, to ensure that, it will affect in a positive way, your P&L. It'll ensure that you're able to identify growth opportunities and be a much more valued department, and client services is a critical department in an agency if set up correctly. So the more that you guys can work together, ultimately is only going to benefit the client.
And also, from a personal point of view, I want to add, there's actually a bit of a feel good thing. Like, if the client services can embrace strategy to do good work, it makes CS look better in the eyes of the client. If strategists can enable CS to have more face time with the client, they're going to be happier. The strategists are going to get their work done better. So there really is a kinship, I think, of just like helping each other out there.
Absolutely. And look, what me and Simon have done is actually put together a workshop offering for you guys. This is a special pricing for you guys, just to support if anyone is struggling with this. So it's a 2-hour workshop where we'll help you map out those clear roles and responsibilities, define how your two teams collaborate together, create those true ways of working frameworks and those quick win actions to ensure that your teams are working much more collaborative, and to bridge that gap of the two siloed teams. So if you are interested in that, then we've done the whole lovely QR code. So feel free to scan the QR code, fill in your details, and we can get into contact with you. Otherwise, you've also got our contact details on the page as well if you want to get in touch with either of us as well. But
there's no card details needed. It's just your details. So just to FYI, we're not making you pay for anything.
Yeah, it's a good point. So even if you're just interested in having a conversation, there's no pressure whatsoever about it. But I hope that you have found that useful and you've got some good takeaways there. And like I said, if you want to chat to either me or Simon, then please do feel free to reach out.